Hello everyone, what is up? Welcome back to another episode of Killer Instinct, you guys. Thank you so much for joining me here today. If you're new here, hi, my name is Savannah and I am your host of Killer Instinct. Before we get started, make sure you go ahead and hit that subscribe button. That way you never miss an episode. We post weekly here on the podcast every single Wednesday and you're not going to want to miss it. We also upload the video version on YouTube on Wednesdays as well, so make sure you are subscribed. Now, as you guys can tell by the title of today's episode, we have a wild one to uncover today. I mentioned to you guys at the beginning of the month of July that we are focusing the month on sadistic and sinister stalkers, and this case definitely falls into that category. Today, we are talking about the brutal and unfortunate murder of Rebecca Schaeffer. Now, this case is a little bit different than the other stalker cases that we have done previously because this case in particular focuses on a celebrity stalking case. I'm sure a lot of you have heard, whether that be through the media or on the news, of cases of celebrities being stalked, whether that be by overly obsessed fans, people who absolutely adore them, or the people on the opposite side of that spectrum, people who absolutely cannot stand them, or people who believe that they have created a false reality to be in a relationship with a specific celebrity. All of those things are very true and horrific realities for a lot of those types of celebrities in the world. And sadly, that is also the truth for the case that we are talking about today, Rebecca's case. So with that being said, let's jump right on into it. Rebecca Schaeffer was born on November 6, 1967 in Eugene, Oregon to her parents, Dana and Benson. Her father, Benson, worked as a child psychologist while her mom was a professor at Willamette University as well as Portland Community College. Now, Rebecca was the only child of her parents, and the three of them were as close as could be. At one point, Rebecca stated that, quote, "No matter where we are in the world, we are like a three-legged stool," end quote. That is about her describing her relationship with her parents. Rebecca grew up in Portland, Oregon, and attended Lincoln High School, and she really excelled here. She did great socially and academically, and for a good period of time, Rebecca had aspirations of becoming a rabbi when she got older. She was raised Jewish and thought that that would be the path that she would want to take. However, when she was a junior in high school, she began modeling. She was referred to a talent agency by her hairdresser, and that is where the modeling career really began. She began being featured in different department store catalogs, which then led to her being on some different TV commercials, and that led her being an extra on some TV shows as well. Now, while being in the entertainment industry was not something that Rebecca ever envisioned or predicted for herself growing up, she certainly was excited to see what her future was going to hold for her in terms of her career. Now, by 1984, Rebecca, who was still living in Oregon, decided that she was going to make the leap. She was going to chase her dreams and follow her goals, and that led her to New York City. She ended up moving to New York City when she was 16 years old with aspirations of continuing a modeling and acting career. Now, even though Rebecca moved to New York with the aspirations of furthering her career, her education was still very important to her as well as her parents. Her parents wanted to make sure that even though she was in New York focusing on modeling and focusing on acting, that she was still taking her education seriously because, again, she still was only 16 years old at the time. That is when she enrolled into the Professional Children's School. Now, this was and still is a school where kids who had dreams of being actors or dancers or models would attend. It was a college preparatory school that gave kids the flexibility to continue focusing on their dreams while furthering their education. Now, a school like this really did seem to be the perfect fit for Rebecca. So she enrolls in this school and she begins attending while also continuing to find different modeling gigs and acting jobs. And this is when she landed a role on her first ever soap opera. She played the role of Annie Barnes in a soap opera called One Life to Live. Now, Rebecca's role lasted for about 6 months, and while she was acting on One Life to Live, she was working towards her modeling career. That really was the main goal for quite some time, was modeling for Rebecca. She wanted to be a model. She really thought that that is where her career was going to lead her, and that's where everything was going to fall into place. However, Rebecca was struggling when it comes to modeling. She was struggling fitting in to the high fashion world. Rebecca was 5'7", and at the time, she was considered actually too short for high fashion modeling, so she really wasn't getting any bookings at this time. Now, in 1985, this is when Rebecca really made a last-ditch effort towards her modeling career. She knew that it was not working out, her trying to model in New York, in the United States, so instead, she packed her bags and she moved to Japan, hoping that she would have more luck modeling there. However, Rebecca learned fairly quickly that the modeling world was a very, very difficult area to get into, and it was not working out for her in Japan either. So at that time, she packed up her bags and moved back to New York City. Now, up until this point, like I said, Rebecca had been focusing solely on modeling, with kind of the acting being the side quest, acting being the side gig. But at this point, when she returned from Japan, she realized that if she really wanted to make a name for herself in the entertainment industry, that acting was probably going to be her best bet into doing that. So while she was acting and looking for gigs in New York, she also was working part-time as a waitress to make money on the side. Now, in 1985, after Rebecca returned from Japan, she ended up auditioning and actually landing the role in a TV sitcom called My Sister Sam. Now, My Sister Sam, like I said, was a sitcom that was on air for 2 seasons from 1986 to 1988. It starred actress Pam Dauber, and then Rebecca Schaeffer landed the role of Patty Russell. Now, Rebecca's character in the show moves from Oregon to San Francisco to live with her sister Sam after the death of her parents. Now, this ended up being partially true because Rebecca was also from Oregon, and during the filming of My Sister Sam, Rebecca moved out to Burbank, California, and actually lived with Pam during the time that she was on the show. Now, obviously, the part about Rebecca's character, Patty, her parents, and My Sister Sam, that was not equivalent to Rebecca's real life, luckily. However, just geographically, the similarities were also there. Now, during her time on My Sister Sam, Rebecca really shined in this show. She was able to show off her acting capabilities. This was the first time that she had been on screen for an extended period of time like this. And this was also a very popular TV show at the time. This was a show that a lot of people were watching. The show really did pick up in its first season, and Rebecca and her character were getting a lot of recognition, and Rebecca was getting a lot of praise. Being 16 years old and having the capability of acting on the level that she did wasn't something that people saw very often. Now, when Rebecca saw the amount of attention that the show was getting, the overall good reaction to the show, as well as Rebecca's notoriety for her acting skills, this really put any apprehension that Rebecca had previously had about leaving New York out the window, because she realized that this was the path that she was supposed to be on. She was thrilled to be a part of something like this, and her castmates really became her second family. Now, during this time in Rebecca's personal life, she also got a boyfriend. She started dating a 23-year-old UCLA film student named Brad Silberling. Now, Brad actually went on to be very successful in the entertainment and film industry himself, but at the time that he was dating Rebecca, he claims that the two got very serious very quickly. Rebecca would often talk to Brad about what their future was going to look like together. They would drive through different neighborhoods through Los Angeles and look at different houses and envision what their life was going to be like in the following years. So around this time, again, My Sister Sam had picked up. It was doing really well. Rebecca was getting a lot of recognition and notoriety, but she was also getting a little bit more of a celebrity factor and lifestyle that she had never experienced before. At this time, Rebecca landed the cover of 17 magazine in their March 1987 issue, and with Rebecca's growing celebrity status, she began attracting a following of people who really did idolize her, and this also included her beginning to receive fan mail. Now, getting fan mail was such an exciting turning point for Rebecca. It was a really exciting time in her career because, again, she felt like people were seeing her. She felt like people really liked her and were noticing her for her accomplishments accomplishments. She really did feel like everything that she had been working towards in this industry was paying off up until this point. And with Rebecca being very new to this industry, she was very novice and quite naive on a certain level. The other people around her, her castmates, other people on her crew, her management, they really did try and warn Rebecca about the dangers that could come along with having people know who you are. Rebecca's hairstylist for My Sister Sam recalls how Rebecca was incredibly excited about getting mail and messages from fans, but her hairstylist told her not to respond to any mail or gifts that she received because not everyone had the best of intentions. Now, Rebecca's castmates and others who worked alongside of her also claimed that she was a little naive to the whole process. However, it should be noted that that naivety really just stemmed from her innocence. Rebecca had a certain celebrity status to her, but she never acted like it. She would never let you know that that was what she did. She was very proud of who she was, but her behavior, her attitude, her character was not standoffish. It was not feeling like she was better than anyone else. She really didn't live a super luxurious lifestyle and really didn't let the fame get to her head. Her boyfriend Brad said that he actually never even heard the word fame come out of her mouth. It was not something that she really seemed to care that much about. Like, being a celebrity was not incredibly important to her. She just wanted to act. She was just talented and wanted to fulfill her career goals in acting. Now, because that came along with being a celebrity and that came along with, the fans and the fan mail and the notoriety that she was getting, that was an exciting extra to her. That was something that she had never experienced before. Her castmate Pam in My Sister Sam, who played the role of Sam, really did take Rebecca under her wing during the time that they were filming, because not only were they living together, so there was that older sister, younger sister mentality, but Pam really did try and warn Rebecca about the dangers that could come with being known on a television show. Pam herself had been in the industry for quite some time, and she had experienced the dangers that come along with it. She herself had experienced stalkers, people showing up to her house, and she was really trying to shield Rebecca from that and make Rebecca aware of what could come out of that. She even advised Rebecca to not put her driver's license. She even advised Rebecca to not put her address on her driver's license. That way people couldn't get a hold of her address through the DMV, and also advised her not to put her real name on her mailbox. So Rebecca was definitely being made aware of the darker side that could come with being a celebrity and being famous. And even though Rebecca knew that she was being watched on TV, what she didn't know is that she did, in fact, have a stalker. She was being stalked. So Rebecca did have a circle of people who were rallying around her and trying to support her by letting her know some of the darker things and the darker side that comes with celebrity and fame. And one of those things is stalking. And at the time, Rebecca just did not think that that would happen to her. She knew that she was being watched on TV. She knew that people knew who she was. However, what she didn't realize was that her castmates were right, and Rebecca was in fact being stalked. Over her time on screen, Rebecca caught the attention of a 19-year-old man named Robert John Bardo. Robert John Bardo was born on January 2nd, 1970 to his parents, and he was the youngest of 7 children. Robert's father was in the Air Force, so the family moved around quite frequently before settling down in Tucson, Arizona in 1983. Now, it was said that Robert didn't have the easiest upbringing. There was claims and allegations of abuse by an older sibling of his, and after he threatened to end his own life, Robert was placed in foster care. Now, mental health problems did run in Robert's family, and he himself was also diagnosed with bipolar disorder. Now, by the time that Robert was 15 years old, he was put in a mental facility to get treatment. However, again, that only lasted one singular month. After being released, he dropped out of high school in the 9th grade and began working as a janitor at his local Jack in the Box while still living at home. Now, before Robert began his infatuation with Rebecca, there was another girl that he had set his eyes on. This was not the first time that Robert had grown an infatuation and an obsession with a celebrity. Robert had previously become obsessed with a 10-year-old girl named Samantha Smith. Now, Samantha was a peace activist as well as a child actress from Maine. She became famous during the Cold War for her anti-war outreaches between the US and the Soviet Union, and she was also on Disney Channel and was a co-star for a TV show called Lime Street. Now, sadly, Samantha passed away at 13 years old on a plane crash that was heading back to Maine, and after losing his infatuation with Samantha, because sadly she did pass away, that is when Robert needed to find a new center of his attention. He needed to pull his obsession and his infatuation to someone else, and that is when he landed on Rebecca. Now, something to note about Robert, which is also very true for a lot of other celebrities who get stalked by people who watch them on TV, is that their stalkers aren't necessarily obsessed with the person outside of the screen. They more so become obsessed with the character. So for Robert, he was more obsessed with Rebecca's character, Patty, than he actually was with Rebecca. But again, to make that differentiation for him was very difficult. He couldn't imagine that Rebecca was a different person outside of Patty. Now, for Robert, he is looking at Rebecca on screen playing Patty Russell, and to him, Rebecca's character, Patty, was very bubbly and outgoing and a very girl next door type of persona. However, he knew nothing about Rebecca Schaeffer at all. Again, it was all about Patty for him. Now, when Robert's obsession began, he also began trying to get in contact with Rebecca in any which way that he could. And this began with writing letters to Rebecca. Now, in each letter, Robert wrote about how he felt like he was connecting more and more to her. In the letters, he told Rebecca that he was a sensitive guy and that he related to her. Robert said in one letter, quote, "She came into my life in the right moment. She was brilliant, pretty, outrageous. Her innocence impressed me. She turned into a goddess for me, an idol. Since then, I turned into an atheist. I only adored her," end quote. Now, Rebecca was receiving an abundance of letters from many people. However, she was receiving a lot from Robert in particular. And on one specific occasion, Rebecca actually decided that she was going to respond to Robert's letter. So she herself wrote Robert a letter in response to his, claiming that his letters were the nicest that she had ever received. She also gave him an autographed picture of herself and sent it to Robert. Now, for Rebecca, when she did this, again, her innocence took over, and she truthfully just believed that she was responding to a fan and that she was being nice, and it was the right thing to do. Someone who was so kind to her about her career and someone who took the time to write fan mail. She wanted to be respectful of that, and so that is where her innocence came into play. However, for Robert, on the other hand, when Robert saw that Rebecca had written back to him, this really just confirmed all of his feelings in his mind that he had about Rebecca. And even more so to him, it was confirmation that Rebecca also reciprocated the feelings that he had. And once Robert received that letter from Rebecca, that was really only the beginning, and it truly was the tipping point. Because once he received that letter from Rebecca, there was no way that Robert was going to stop until he could actually have Rebecca in front of him. Robert, after receiving the letter, began calling Warner Brothers Studios consistently, asking to speak to Rebecca, and that is exactly where My Sister Sam was being filmed. And so he would consistently call the studio, try and get in contact with anyone who could get him in contact with Rebecca, but time and time again, he was turned down. The warmer and sunnier days of summer are here, and I know for a lot of us, we want to enjoy our summer with our family or our friends, spend time outside, make memories, and not have to worry about cooking or meal prepping. Now, luckily, with Factor's fresh and never frozen meals, they've got you covered. Factor's meals are dietitian approved and ready to eat in just 2 minutes, so no matter how busy you are, you will always have time to enjoy nutritious, great tasting meals. Factor has so many options options for you to choose from, like keto, protein plus, calorie smart, vegetarian, and more. They have 35 different meals and more than 60 add-ons to choose from every single week, so you'll always have new flavors to explore. Treat yourself to restaurant quality meals that feature premium ingredients while simultaneously keeping your kitchen time to a minimum. So what are you waiting for? Head to factormeals.com/killer50 and use code KILLER50 to get 50% off your first box plus 20% off your next month. That's code KILLER50 at factormeals.com/killer50 to get 50% off your first box plus 20% off your next month while your subscription is active. Now, thinking it would get him a better reaction, Robert actually began giving whoever would answer the phone different names, different aliases. Specifically, he called himself David Carlisle instead of Robert Bardot, thinking that it would throw people off of their tracks, or possibly if he said that he was a different person, then he would be able to get in contact with Rebecca. However, each and every time he was turned down. Now, at this point, Robert's obsession was only beginning to grow more and more. He began drawing hundreds and hundreds of portraits of her. That was something that he did in his free time when he wasn't trying to get in contact with Rebecca. He was drawing her. He drew many, many portraits of her. Now, I want to fast forward to June 2nd, 1987, and at this point, Robert decided that he was going to take his relationship with Rebecca into his own hands. He decided that he was going to fly out to Burbank, California from Arizona to meet Rebecca. So he arrived to the Warner Brothers studios with a big, big bouquet of flowers as well as a giant 5-foot-tall teddy bear. When he arrived at the studio, he attempted to make his way inside. However, he was stopped by security. Now, when Robert was approached by security, he told them that he needed to see Rebecca because he loved her and that he was a friend of hers and that these were gifts for her. Now, at this point, security did call Rebecca to see if she was expecting any visitors or any gifts, and at this point, she claimed that she was not. So Rebecca hung up the phone and Robert was denied entry. Now, at this point, Rebecca wasn't really thinking much of this interaction or of this phone call at all. However, security did take Robert to the head of security's office at the studio, and the head of security was already aware of Robert because of the phone calls that he had been making, those persistent phone calls. And according to the head of security, Robert showed up that day on June 2nd wearing athletic, casual clothes, and his behavior didn't seem erratic or concerning. He was making eye contact with the head of security, and he was able to articulate that he loved Rebecca and he needed to see her. However, this is when the head of security told him that he needed to go back to his hotel and not ever come back into the studio. The head of security made it clear that Robert would never gain access to see Rebecca. Now, Robert said at this time during this interaction, he became very frustrated because this was not the result that he was expecting. He was not expecting to be turned down. He thought that he was going to be able to see Rebecca that day. Now, even though Robert was very frustrated, this did not stop him. If anything, it only motivated him even more to see Rebecca. At this point, he went back to his hotel. However, the following day came back to the studio, this time with a knife. Now, Robert was turned away, but shockingly, police were never notified or called during these situations. Robert was just turned away by police, and ultimately, he went back home to Tucson, Arizona. Now, sadly, after wrapping a second season, My Sister Sam was canceled and the final episode aired on April 12th of 1988. Now, even though the show canceling was a very sad time for all of the castmates and everyone working on the show, Rebecca was sad to see the chapter end. However, she was also optimistic about the future opportunities that she could get after moving on from My Sister Sam. And the opportunities definitely were there waiting for Rebecca, because after ending My Sister Sam, Rebecca did go on to work on several other shows. Specifically, she worked on a show called The End of Innocence. Innocence. Now, in The End of Innocence, Rebecca got casted as a younger version of the main character, who was played by actress Diane Cannon. Now, just like in My Sister Sam, Rebecca thrived in this role. Everyone on set said that Rebecca was optimistic, talented, and excited for her future. Around this time, Rebecca ended up moving from her quiet, quaint home in Laurel Canyon to an apartment in West Hollywood. She then picked up another movie called Scenes from the Class Struggle in Beverly Hills, and this was definitely a little bit of a different film that Rebecca had ever been in. It was a little bit more of a sophisticated film, and alongside that, it showed Rebecca's character being involved in different romantic relationships, and it specifically had a love scene in it. Now, up until this point, Rebecca had never done a love scene such as this, and it was a very different character than Rebecca was used to playing. Now, when the movie was released, and when Robert in particular saw the film, when he saw this film and he saw Rebecca perform that love scene, a switch flipped in him, and Robert became enraged. He wrote in his diary, quote, "I have an obsession with the unattainable, and I need to destroy those in which I cannot obtain," end quote. With this new film that Rebecca was in, it completely destroyed Rebecca's previous character images for Robert in particular. Again, Robert could not rationalize the fact that Rebecca was playing different roles. She was playing different characters. For him, he felt like Rebecca was cheating on him. He felt like Rebecca was having an affair, and he was watching it play out in front of his eyes, and that is why he became so enraged. Now, around this time and at this point, Robert was escalating, and he wanted to figure out where Rebecca lived, because now his goal was to go find Rebecca and figure out why she would do this to him. Now, Robert had heard at this point of another woman who had gotten stalked. It was another actress named Teresa Salvano. Now, some of you may have actually be familiar with this stalking case, because Teresa was stalked by a man who did attempt to kill her by stabbing her multiple times, and thankfully she did live. However, Robert learned about that stalker and learned in what ways the stalker was able to maneuver, finding more information out about Teresa, because that was the type of practice that he wanted to implement in finding information out about Rebecca. Now, this is when Robert learned that Teresa's stalker had hired a private investigator to follow Teresa around and basically figure out where she had lived and everything that happened in her day-to-day schedule. And this is when Robert got the idea to do the same thing to Rebecca. So Robert then hired a private investigator and paid him $300 to find out where Rebecca lived. Now, this private investigator was able to do that through accessing DMV records. This took all of 5 minutes. All the private investigator had to do was go to the DMV and ask for these records. Now, the laws definitely have gotten stricter since then. However, it is mind-blowing to think about the fact that really anyone could have access to your records, from the DMV, from a government office like that. It was just a very unsettling thing to think that that was so easily accessible. Now, around this time, Robert also attempted to purchase a gun in Tucson, Arizona. However, he was denied purchase. The gun store owner said that he noticed that something was just a little bit off about Robert, so he decided to ask Robert some more questions and realized through doing so that Robert did have a history of mental illness. As I said in the beginning, he was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. So because of this, the gun shop owner refused him from purchasing a gun. Now, the store owner was actually convinced that Robert was going to come back and try and repurchase a gun through a different employee. So he printed out a picture of Robert and put it in the back room so all of the employees knew not to sell a gun to Robert. Now, at this point, Robert realized that he needed to figure out a loophole in this situation. So he went to his brother. Robert went to his brother and asked his brother if he could buy the gun for him. Now, during this conversation, Robert's brother was apprehensive about it because he didn't necessarily know why Robert would need a gun. So he had Robert promise him that he would only use the gun when he was with his brother and it would only be used for target shooting. And Robert did promise that. However, his underlying intentions were very, very different. Now, his brother was able to go and purchase the gun for Robert, and Robert also purchased 10 hollow point bullets because he learned that hollow point bullets explode inside of their victim, killing them almost instantly and leaving them no chance of survival. And that is what he wanted. So now we move to the night of July 17th, 1989. And on this particular night, Robert got on an overnight Greyhound bus from Tucson to Los Angeles, and he brought only one bag with him. Inside of that bag was the gun that his brother had purchased. Now, Robert also brought with him the letter that Rebecca had sent back to him, as well as the signed picture and a copy of the book, A Catcher in the Rye. Now, Robert claimed that there was no reasoning behind him bringing this book. However, a very eerie detail is that the man who killed John Lennon, who's named Mark David Chapman, he had also been carrying around this particular book when he murdered John Lennon. However, according to Robert, he claimed that it was just a coincidence. However, we do know that Robert had a history of studying stalkers, so who quite knows? Now, on that same token, though, something to also be noted is that Mark David Chapman claims that prior to Rebecca's death, Robert had been writing him while Mark was in prison, asking him about what life in prison was like. But again, that is just what Mark Chapman states to be the truth. So now let's move back to July 17th, 1989. Robert gets on this bus and he actually tells his sister that he was going to Los Angeles to see Rebecca and quote unquote save her. That was a terminology that he used. And according to his sister, she felt like that terminology was odd and strange. However, she could have never anticipated what would have happened. So now we move on to July 18th, 1989. And ironically enough, I am actually filming this on July 18th, 2024. So we are filming this on the anniversary of Rebecca's death. Now, this was supposed to be a very exciting day for Rebecca because she was actually auditioning for a role in The Godfather 3 later that afternoon. And this was a huge milestone in her career. So that morning she was preparing, figuring out what she was going to wear, talking to, the people on her team. And it was also the day, July 18th, it was the day that Robert arrived in LA. He arrived in LA early in the morning on July 18th. Now, at the time, Rebecca, like I said, she was living in an apartment. And just to give you a little bit of an understanding of the format and the layout of this apartment, there was a front door to the building that you needed access with a key. And if you did not have the key, you could look to the side and there would be different intercoms. So you would have different doorbells that would ring to go to specific apartments. And then whoever was in that apartment could talk to you over the intercom. Now, on that specific day, that specific morning on July 18th, Rebecca was awaiting the script for Godfather 3. There was a carrier that was going to come and give her the script. So she was expecting someone to come that morning. Now, what is very unfortunate and just frustrating and just adds to the frustration of this case is the fact that the intercom system at Rebecca's apartment was not working that time. So because of that, when someone would ring the doorbell, whoever's apartment they were ringing to would have to come out physically and see who rang their doorbell. They wouldn't be able to talk to them over the intercom. Now, after getting off the bus on July 18th, Robert made his way to Rebecca's apartment. Now, he did have the address based off of what his private investigator had given him. However, he began wandering the streets and showing people pictures of Rebecca. Many witnesses remember this. They remember having this interaction with Robert. He would ask other people where Rebecca lived. Do you know where she is? Asking others about Rebecca. However, it wasn't an odd or completely out of the ordinary thing to have people do this in West Hollywood, California. Like, that behavior wasn't completely outlandish. So really everyone just ignored him. They didn't think of it as a threat. Now, ultimately, Robert did find Rebecca's apartment and he walked up to Rebecca's apartment door and rang her doorbell. Now, like I said, the intercom was broken, so Rebecca had to come down and see Robert. And when she opened the door, again, she expected to be receiving her script. However, instead, she was greeted with Robert. Now, Robert himself has said that he was surprised that he would get such easy access to Rebecca, he thought that being face to face with her and having that interaction was going to be a lot more difficult. Now, in this initial reaction, Rebecca was very nice. She was very polite. She was kind. Robert told her that he was a fan of hers, and he even showed her the autographed picture and the letter. They even shook hands, and that is when Rebecca excused herself and told Robert that she had an appointment that she had to get prepared for before walking back inside. Now, at this point, Robert was left outside of Rebecca's apartment, not really knowing what to do, and that is when he walked down the street to a nearby diner. He got to the diner, sat in a booth, had some breakfast, and he realized when he was sitting in that diner, upon reflecting back on the interaction that he had with Rebecca, that he was not satisfied with it. He was not happy with how the interaction went, and he was frustrated that Rebecca did not remember him. He was frustrated that Rebecca didn't seem to have that same immediate connection that he did to her. So at that point, he decided he was going back to Rebecca's apartment. Now, on his way back to Rebecca's apartment, Robert made a stop at a payphone where he called his sister again, and this time told her that she was going to hear about him on the news shortly. Now, at this point, his sister did not know what he was referring to or what he was talking about. However, she did try to talk him out of whatever it was that he was about to do. However, Robert hung up the phone and continued on his way back to Rebecca's apartment. Now, once he arrived, he did the same thing. He rang the doorbell again, and Rebecca didn't know who was at the door. So again, she had to go down and see it, and saw that again, it was Robert. Now, when she saw Robert for a second time, Rebecca was not as polite. She did not meet Robert with the same kindness that she did the first time, because now she has this man, this stranger man who she does not know, coming to her apartment a second time. She not only has things to do later that day, but the interaction in and of itself is just uncomfortable. And according to Robert, he claimed that during this interaction, Rebecca told him that he was wasting her time. And when she said that, that is when Robert said that he was at his breaking point. Rebecca turned around to walk back inside. However, that is when Robert claimed he grabbed Rebecca by her arm and said, "I forgot to give you something." He then whipped out the gun that he was hiding in the back of his waistband, pointed it at her chest, and shot her straight through the heart. Neighbors of Rebecca claimed that at that point, after they heard a gunshot, they then heard Rebecca crying out, "Why me?" over and over. Neighbors ran to help her and found Rebecca on the floor in a pool of blood. An ambulance arrived to take Rebecca to the hospital. However, sadly, it was too late and she passed away 30 minutes after she was shot. Now, once the news of Rebecca's murder was learned by her family and her friends and the media, no one could believe it. Everyone was in complete and utter shock that something like this actually ended up happening to Rebecca of all people. She was, again, America's sweetheart, girl next door. You know, she was so innocent and so optimistic about what life had to offer her. Everyone who knew her as a kind, bubbly person. And the fact that this could happen to someone like her was really just mind-blowing. But the big question on everyone's mind now was who did it? And this is when a manhunt really started. But little did anyone know that the man that they were searching for was Robert, their gunman, and he had already gotten back onto a Greyhound bus and headed back to Arizona immediately after the shooting. So he was already on his way to Tucson by the time that police began looking for him. However, the following day, on July 19th, Robert actually inadvertently turned himself into police, and that happened when police noticed that there was a man on the side of a busy road screaming at an intersection, and over he was screaming, "I killed Rebecca Schaeffer." And the man who was saying that was Robert Bardo. Now, immediately police arrested him and he was extradited back to California after confessing that he did in fact shoot and kill Rebecca. Now, after Robert was extradited back to California, a trial was set in place. The prosecuting attorney was Marcia Clark, and you actually may know her as the lead prosecutor for the O.J. Simpson trial. However, before that, she was the lead prosecutor for Rebecca Schaeffer. The case itself also didn't have a jury. The public defender said that he wanted to waive his client's right to a jury in order to get the death penalty off the table, which they did. And this meant that the judge himself was going to be deciding the fate of Robert Bardo. Now, for the defense's side, they weren't arguing that Robert didn't kill Rebecca. Everyone knew that Robert did in fact kill Rebecca. Robert himself had admitted to killing Rebecca, but the defense was trying to blame the mental health problems that Robert had for the reason that he committed the murder itself. Now, there were many people who testified in this trial against Robert, including the head of security who turned Robert away at Warner Brothers Studios. The brother of Robert was also called to the stand. He again said that Robert paid him $200 to purchase the gun, and despite promising to only use it with each other, his brother claimed that he never saw the gun again. Robert's father also took the stand and said that when he heard Rebecca had died on the news, he went to check Robert's room and saw that the gun was gone, and he instinctually knew that Robert had harmed Rebecca. Now, for the prosecution, they were just trying to prove that this was calculated, premeditated murder. That is what they were trying to prove, and they were able to do so through a confession that Robert had made. After being arrested, Robert, when speaking to authorities and confessing, he had been videotaped. His confession was videotaped, and while he was reenacting what had happened with Rebecca, when he says that he pulled out the gun to shoot her, he reenacted it in a way where it shows that he put his hand behind his back in order to grab the gun from the back of his waist. And for prosecution, this showed premeditation because that meant that Robert was hiding the gun with the intent to use it on Rebecca. So that was the angle that they used. And ultimately, it worked because at the end of the trial, Robert John Bardo was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. And to this day, Robert is still finishing out his sentence and will finish out his sentence for the rest of his life over what he did to Rebecca. He does claim that he feels guilt for what he did and feels very sorry for his actions. However, regardless of the guilt that he claims to feel, whether you believe it or not, none of it is ever going to bring back Rebecca. And that, you guys, is the case of Rebecca Schaeffer. I'm very interested to hear what you guys have to say about this one, so let me know in the comments below. And with that being said, you guys, that is all for me today. Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of Killer Instinct. Again, if you're new here, hi, my name is Savannah, and I'm your host. Make sure you hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. We post weekly here on the podcast every single Wednesday. You're not going to want to miss it. I'll be back next week with a brand new one for you guys, and until then, stay safe. Bye, guys.